What if the most dangerous threat to the survival of the American Republic was not a foreign invader or a nuclear strike, but the unchecked ambition of its most celebrated military hero? This question haunted the halls of the Pentagon and the corridors of the White House as the 1950s dawned, pitting two titans of history against one another in a silent war for the soul of the nation's foreign policy. Before we delve deeper into this high-stakes confrontation between Dwight D, Eisenhower, and Douglas MacArthur, take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like this video to help others find it, share this incredible story with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below about a detail you didn't know or the moment that most surprised you. The friction between these two men did not begin on the battlefields of Korea, but decades earlier in the sweltering heat of Washington, D.C., and the tropical humidity of the Philippines, where a young Major Eisenhower served under the imperious General MacArthur. Eisenhower, a man of quiet discipline and organizational genius, watched as MacArthur cultivated a persona that bordered on the messianic, a style of leadership that demanded total loyalty and brooked no dissent. By the time the Korean War erupted in June 1950, the dynamic had shifted from mentor and protege to a volatile rivalry between a president-in-waiting and a general who believed he was above the civilian government he served. The year was 1951, and the world stood on the precipice of the Third World War as Douglas MacArthur, the hero of Incheon, pushed for an escalation that terrified the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Truman administration. MacArthur's demand to use atomic weapons against Chinese positions and to expand the conflict into mainland China represented a fundamental break from the policy of containment that Eisenhower, then still in a military capacity but with an eye on the presidency, knew was essential for global stability. Eisenhower watched from across the Atlantic as MacArthur's rhetoric became increasingly inflammatory, challenging the very principle of civilian control over the military. He saw a man he once respected becoming a liability to the very peace they had both fought to secure during the horrors of World War II. The tension was not merely professional. It was deeply personal, rooted in Eisenhower's belief that MacArthur's ego had finally eclipsed his judgment, threatening to drag the United States into a localized conflict that could ignite a global conflagration. In private letters and quiet meetings, Eisenhower began to express a profound concern, noting that MacArthur had lost touch with the reality of modern geopolitical chess. As MacArthur's public defiance reached a fever pitch, culminating in his unauthorized letter to Congressman Joseph Martin, the stage was set for a dramatic reckoning that would redefine the limits of military power. When President Harry Truman finally made the agonizing decision to relieve MacArthur of his command on April 11, 1951, the nation was plunged into a state of shock and fury. Eisenhower, though not yet president, was a man everyone looked to for a sense of direction, yet his internal reaction was far more complex than his public neutrality suggested. He understood that MacArthur's dismissal was a necessary surgical strike to save the Constitution, but he also anticipated the political firestorm that would follow. The streets of America were filled with ticker-tape parades for the returning hero, while Eisenhower remained in the shadows, calculating the long-term impact of this rupture on the future of American leadership. He knew that MacArthur's "Old Soldiers Never Die" speech to Congress was a masterclass in theater, but he also recognized it as a dangerous siren song that ignored the complexities of a nuclear-armed world where total victory was no longer a simple equation. By the time Eisenhower ascended to presidency in January 1953, the ghost of MacArthur's insubordination still lingered in the Oval Office, serving as a constant reminder of the fragility of the chain of command. Eisenhower's approach to the Korean stalemate was the antithesis of MacArthur's. Where the general wanted fire and fury, the president sought a cold, calculated peace. In a secret meeting that history often overlooks, Eisenhower confronted the legacy of his former boss, making it clear that the era of the proconsul general was over. He spoke of the military-industrial complex not just as an economic warning, but as a psychological one, fearing that men like MacArthur would always see war as the first option rather than the last resort. The two men finally met in a tense encounter where the air was thick with decades of unspoken resentment and professional rivalry. Eisenhower, now the commander-in-chief, had to navigate the delicate task of honoring a war hero while dismantling the dangerous precedent that hero had attempted to set. As we reach the midpoint of this historical journey through the clashes of these two formidable leaders, It is essential to reflect on how their conflict shaped the world we live in today. If you are finding this deep dive into the hidden tensions of the Cold War compelling, please subscribe to the channel now. Like the video to support our historical research. Share this narrative with a friend who appreciates the complexities of leadership, and drop a comment sharing which part of the Eisenhower-MacArthur relationship you found most intriguing so far. This was a moment where the personal became political and the political became global, as Eisenhower worked tirelessly to ensure that the American military remained an instrument of the people, not a power unto itself. He often reflected on his time in Manila, remembering how MacArthur's staff referred to him as the best clerk in the Army, a slight he never forgot, but used as fuel to become the most powerful man on earth. The irony was not lost on him. The clerk was now the one holding the leash of the Caesar of the Pacific. The final years of their relationship were marked by a cold respect and profound distance, as Eisenhower steered the nation through the Suez Crisis and the early days of the space race, always mindful of the shadow MacArthur cast. He famously remarked that he had studied dramatics under MacArthur for 5 years, a biting critique of the general's penchant for self-aggrandizement over substance. Yet, when MacArthur's health began to fail, Eisenhower showed the grace of a statesman, acknowledging the undeniable brilliance of the man, while never backing down from his conviction that MacArthur had gone too far. The legacy of their fallout remains a cornerstone of American civil-military relations, a warning that even the most gifted leaders must be subject to the law. As the sun set on both their careers, the fundamental difference remained. MacArthur wanted to be remembered as a conqueror, while Eisenhower wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker. In the final assessment, the story of what Eisenhower said when MacArthur went too far is not just a tale of two men, but a testament to the resilience of democratic institutions over individual will. Eisenhower's quiet resolve proved that the loudest voice in a room is rarely the strongest, and that true leadership often involved the courage to say no to the pursuit of glory at the expense of safety. This narrative serves as a timeless reminder of the importance of balance and the dangers of unchecked power, lessons that resonate as loudly today as they did in the 1950s. If you've stayed with us through this exploration of history, please subscribe to the channel to never miss our long-form documentaries. Like this video to help it reach a wider audience. Share it with someone who values historical truth, and leave a final comment about what you learned today or what other historical rivalries you want us to cover next. History is not just a collection of dates, but a series of choices made by men in the crucible of crisis, and the choice Eisenhower made to restrain MacArthur may have been the one that saved the world from itself. The tension between General Douglas MacArthur and Dwight D. Eisenhower was never a mere disagreement over tactical maneuvers. It was a profound ideological schism regarding the very soul of American governance and the limits of individual power. MacArthur viewed himself as a modern-day Roman proconsul, a messianic figure destined to reshape the destiny of Asia through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance, while Eisenhower was the ultimate master of logistics and a diplomat in uniform who understood that military power was but one instrument in a much larger symphony of national strategy. As MacArthur began to issue independent communiques that bypassed the Pentagon, suggesting that victory in Korea necessitated the bombing of Chinese bases and the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons to create a radioactive belt across the border, Eisenhower realized the balance of power was being dangerously distorted. He watched with a mixture of professional admiration and personal horror as MacArthur ignored President Truman's directives, acting as if his authority emanated not from the United States Constitution, but from the weight of his own legendary achievements in the Pacific Theater during the 1940s. Eisenhower knew that if MacArthur were not restrained, the precedent of a general dictating foreign policy could erode the foundations of the American Republic, turning the nation into a version of the very autocracies they had fought so hard to defeat in the Second World War. The gravity of this historical crossroads reached its zenith when Eisenhower, during his preparations for the 1952 presidential campaign, began reviewing the private communications of MacArthur's headquarters and realized the extent of the general's isolation from global geopolitical realities. MacArthur remained convinced that the fate of the Western world would be decided exclusively in the rice paddies of the Korean Peninsula, a narrow view that ignored the critical vulnerabilities of Western Europe and the fragility of the NATO alliance that Eisenhower had labored so tirelessly to build. To Eisenhower, MacArthur's behavior was not just simple insubordination. It was a betrayal of the strategic vision required to survive the Cold War without triggering a global apocalypse. While the American public saw a hero in a battered cap and a corncob pipe, Eisenhower saw a man who had become a prisoner of his own myth, unable to see that the world had changed since the surrender on the USS Missouri. He observed the way MacArthur manipulated the press to pressure the White House, a tactic that Eisenhower found fundamentally distasteful and dangerous for preservation of civilian control over the military. Throughout the early 1950s, the behind-the-scenes maneuvering between the Eisenhower camp and the MacArthur loyalists resembled a high-stakes chess match where the board was the entire planet and the pieces were the lives of millions of soldiers. Eisenhower, operating with his trademark hidden-hand leadership style, avoided public mudslinging, but worked diligently within the corridors of power to ensure that MacArthur's influence was quarantined. He spoke frequently with General Omar Bradley and other members of the Joint Chiefs, reinforcing the idea that a limited war was the only way to prevent a total nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. When MacArthur famously declared that there is no substitute for victory, Eisenhower countered in private circles that there was also no substitute for survival. He understood that in the nuclear age, the definition of victory had been permanently altered, a reality that MacArthur seemed either unable or unwilling to accept. This fundamental disconnect created a rift that was as much about the future of warfare as it was about personal ego, as the two men represented two different eras of American history clashing in the hallways of the Pentagon. As the 1952 election approached, the shadow of MacArthur loomed large over the Republican Party, with many far-right elements seeing him as a true standard-bearer of American strength. Eisenhower, however, was chosen for his perceived stability and his ability to unite a fractured nation, a choice that served as a silent rebuke to MacArthur's polarizing grandiosity. Once in the White House, Eisenhower's first order of business regarding the Korean conflict was to do exactly what MacArthur had failed to do: bring the war to a sustainable, if imperfect, conclusion through diplomacy backed by a credible but controlled military threat. He visited the front lines in December 1952, not as a conquering hero seeking a parade, but as a commander seeking an exit strategy that would not bankrupt the nation or ignite a third world war. This quiet, determined approach was Eisenhower's ultimate answer to MacArthur's demand for escalation, proving that a leader's strength is often found in his restraint rather than his aggression. The friction between these two titans continued to manifest in the way the Eisenhower administration restructured the American military, moving away from a massive ground force model MacArthur favored toward a new-look policy that emphasized nuclear deterrence and economic health. Eisenhower's Cross of Gold speech and his warnings about the military-industrial complex were, in many ways, a delayed response to the type of militarism MacArthur embodied. He believed that a nation could destroy itself from within by spending too much on the machinery of war, a philosophy that directly contradicted MacArthur's desire for unlimited resources to achieve total victory in the East. Their interactions during this period remained frosty and formal, with Eisenhower maintaining the decorum of the presidency, while ensuring that MacArthur's political ambitions remained neutralized. He managed to honor the general's service without endorsing his methods, a delicate balancing act that required all of Eisenhower's considerable political skill and emotional intelligence. The internal architecture of the Eisenhower administration was designed specifically to prevent the kind of rogue brilliance that MacArthur had displayed in Korea, as the new president reorganized the National Security Council to ensure that no single military voice could ever again drown out the collective wisdom of civilian advisors and strategic analysts. Eisenhower remembered with chilling clarity the moments during the 1930s when he had to temper MacArthur's more extreme impulses in the Philippines, and he used those memories to craft a system of checks and balances that favored the long haul over the quick fix. While MacArthur argued that the United States should use its temporary atomic monopoly to dictate terms to the communist world, Eisenhower looked at the economic projections and saw a different reality. He knew that a permanent state of high-intensity warfare would hollow out the American middle class and create a garrison state that would eventually collapse under its own weight. He often remarked to his closest aides that a general who does not understand the cost of a loaf of bread is as dangerous as a general who does not understand the range of a cannon. This philosophy became the bedrock of his presidency, leading to a period of unprecedented economic growth that occurred precisely because he refused to follow the path of escalation that MacArthur had so passionately advocated for during his final years of command. By the mid-1950s, the public fascination with MacArthur began to wane as the stability of the Eisenhower era provided a sense of security that the general's fiery rhetoric never could. Yet the president remained vigilant about the MacArthurite faction within the Republican Party that still sought a more aggressive stance in Asia. Eisenhower's strategy was to kill the movement with kindness and protocol, often inviting MacArthur to formal functions where he could be treated with the respect due to a retired hero while being kept far away from the actual levers of policymaking. In these moments, the physical contrast between the two men was striking. MacArthur, tall and theatrical, still carrying the air of an emperor, and Eisenhower, grinning and approachable, but with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that was always 3 steps ahead of his opponents. It was during a particularly tense meeting regarding the defense of Taiwan and the offshore islands of Quemoy and Matsu that Eisenhower's frustration with MacArthur's legacy finally boiled over in private, as he lamented that some of his advisors were still thinking in the terms of 1945 instead of the terrifying reality of the thermonuclear age. He understood that a single mistake in the Pacific could lead to the destruction of New York and Washington, a risk he was never willing to take for the sake of symbolic victory on the Asian mainland. As we navigate the deep waters of this historic rivalry and the decisions that prevented a Third World War, it is vital to remember the importance of supporting the preservation of these stories. If you are captivated by this immersive journey into the minds of Eisenhower and MacArthur, please subscribe to the channel right now. Like this video to ensure more people see this history. Share this narrative with a fellow history buff who needs to hear the truth about these leaders. And leave a comment below describing which man's leadership style you have trusted more during the Cold War. The decisions made in the 1950s did not just stay in the 1950s. They formed the blueprint for the modern world. And understanding the clash between the president and the general is the only way to truly grasp how the American century was maintained to the delicate art of the cold peace rather than the heat of total war. The final years of MacArthur's life were spent in the Waldorf Astoria in New York, a gilded exile where he continued to receive dignitaries and maintain the aura of a man who had been wronged by history, while Eisenhower continued to masterfully navigate the Suez Crisis and the integration of the American South. The president never publicly attacked the general, but his actions spoke with volume that words could never reach, as he systematically dismantled the idea that a military leader could be a law unto himself. Even when MacArthur was called upon to give his famous duty, honor, country speech at West Point in 1962, Eisenhower watched from retirement, acknowledging the beauty of the words while remaining steadfast in his belief that those same virtues were what MacArthur had compromised when he challenged the civilian authority of the United States. The two men finally reached a sort of silent armistice in their old age, a recognition that they were both relics of Titanic era. Yet the fundamental disagreement about the role of the warrior in a democracy remained unresolved until their final breaths. In the end, what Eisenhower said when MacArthur went too far was not just a single quote or a specific reprimand, but a lifelong demonstration that true power lies in the ability to restrain one's own ego for the greater good of the Republic. Eisenhower's legacy is defined by the wars he did not start, while MacArthur's is defined by the one he could not finish on his own terms, leaving us with a profound lesson on the necessity of humility in the face of absolute power. As the narrative of these two giants concludes, we invite you to reflect on how their conflict shaped the very definition of American leadership and the survival of the global order. Please subscribe to our channel for more historical deep dives, like this video, to help us continue producing high-quality content. Share this story with someone who needs to hear this powerful message of leadership and restraint, and leave a comment about the most interesting thing you learned today or a historical figure you'd like us to cover in the future. The story of Eisenhower and MacArthur is a reminder that while old soldiers may fade away, the consequences of their choices will echo through the corridors of time forever.